I immigrated over here from Scotland when I was 16 years old. And my official title the first few years was permanent resident alien. And I had a green card to prove it. The green card, which is very desirable for immigrants. Having a green card means you're permanent here. You can work, you can settle here, and you're here permanently. And you can become a citizen after 5 years if you behave yourself and if you pass the test. And so I was a resident alien for the first few years of my existence here. I never went to high school here. I had graduated from sort of like junior high in Scotland at 15, and I went to work. And by the time I got over here, of course I was fully fledged worker with no real education, very limited education. And at the time I was drafted in 1967, the war was going full tilt. But I was not a citizen. But one of the first lessons I learned was that citizens, non-citizens could be drafted, just as citizens could, which posed a kind of a dilemma for me. I think I was about 18 and a half, close to 19 when I got drafted. And I had just returned from traveling around in Europe, hitchhiking, doing the Europe thing back in the 60s. And then within a couple of months of returning, I got my draft notice, my notice to report for a physical. And I had to register for the draft, of course, which I did. And that posed a dilemma for me, because I was not a citizen. And as you heard in the movie, as many of you remember, many of the young men that were potential draftees left to go to Canada, to escape the draft. So what was I going to do? And I made a good decision, although I was not a very educated person at the time, but I concluded rather naively that if I allowed myself to be drafted, that would of course increase my chances of becoming a citizen. And it would allow me to stay here permanently. If I had left and gone to Canada, which I could have done legally, and probably been more welcomed up there as a Commonwealth citizen, you know, because Canada is much closer to Britain than say, other countries. But and I had a sister up there, living up there, and so I would have been very welcome to go to Canada. But I concluded, rightly so, that I would probably never have been allowed to come back to the United States. So I took my chances and I said, okay, I'll be drafted, I'll go serve. And I was kind of actually intrigued by the idea of Vietnam anyway. My father was a Navy veteran of the British Navy, Royal Navy. So I had been raised sort of with military stories. In fact, the day after I got my notice to report for a physical, I ran down to the Navy recruiter's office and I said, I want to sign up for the Navy. I didn't want to go in the Army because I had heard the stories of my father, who was a World War II veteran, of course. And the recruiter said, son, if you've got your draft notice, you're done for. You're in the Army. Just go ahead and get it over with. I can't do anything for you. So very dejectedly then I got my physical taken care of and I got drafted into the Army. When I reported to Fort Ward, interesting thing that they did back then, when we got off the big bus that delivered us to Fort Ward, the drill sergeants were there to welcome you, and the first thing he says to you is, all aliens stand over here. And so I knew what that meant, and I went over and stood over here. And all the other guys, they're 18, 19-year-old kids, basically, they're saying, gee, he's an alien, you know, what's the matter with him? And it was me and one little Chinese guy from San Francisco, and we stood over there, we were aliens. And that went on all through basic training. Whenever they had to do something that was considered like classified or strategic, they would always separate out the aliens. And I kind of got used to it. After I got to advanced training in the infantry, then they just dropped that distinction. I don't know why they did it, but I went all the way through basic with one little Chinese guy and 2 Canadians, who were my buddies. And a little funny note about that, years later, after Vietnam and before I got married, I still was not a citizen. And my wife said, you know, I think you need to become a citizen before we get married. She said, when our kids go to kindergarten, I don't want somebody telling them, your dad's an alien, you know, and how's that going to affect our kindergarten? So a week before I got married, I became a citizen, which is another story. But back to Vietnam, I spent a year stateside, and I was trained as an infantryman because I had no education of any kind, no skills. I was a good worker, but so I was relegated to what they colloquially called cannon fodder in the previous wars. I was infantry, trained to shoot a rifle and throw a grenade, which I couldn't do very well. I flunked grenade throwing. And drill instructors used to say, just throw it like a damn grenade, like a baseball. And I never threw a baseball. If I could kick it like a soccer ball, they wouldn't let me kick the grenade. I had to throw it. And I just hated basic training. I was not in very good shape, and I flunked most of the things. But like all the guys, I made it out of basic training anyway, so they could send me to infantry school and become an infantryman. And about a year after I was in, then I got my notice for Vietnam. Now I was kind of looking forward to it. When the notice came down, it came down when I was in Fort Carson, Colorado, in an infantry company. And it came to all the guys in the company the same day. They got their notices that were being shipped overseas to Vietnam. And we all knew what that meant, is we were all infantry. And there was a lot of fear and trepidation in that barracks when we got our notices. I was kind of secretly thinking, hey, this is going to be cool. I'm going to finally get to go to war like my dad, and see what it's really like, and test myself, you know. And again, I was very naive and uneducated when I went over there. But the one thing I had going for me, I was a very committed Christian. I was a Mormon at the time. In fact, later, after I came back from Vietnam, I went out as a Mormon missionary for 2 years, which is another story. But I had a lot of faith. And thinking back on the movie that you were just watching, there was a lot of I guess, a discussion of philosophy, you know, on the draft and whether or not you should serve your country. I didn't have much of that conflict in my life. I had concluded that based on my limited education and my desire to become a U.S. citizen and have a new life, I wanted to be part of the system. I was happy to be drafted and happy to go to Vietnam and look forward to it, which was kind of a little bit different than the attitude of most of the guys who went in at the time. Now, there were a lot of what we called RAs that were in the Army at that time, regular Army. That means they were volunteers. They were 3-year commitment guys that signed up. I was drafted, and that was a 2-year commitment. Anyway, we got over to Vietnam, and I still remember the first impression I had after getting out of the plane. We flew over there, unlike the guys that went on troop ships. And when I stepped out of that plane after hours and hours of air-conditioned plane, the humidity and the smells and the sounds just hit me like a brick. I'd never been in a tropical country before, you know, being from Scotland where it's cold and wet all the time. And here I was in the tropics, basically, facing jungle warfare, completely alien environment to me. And as we drove into, from the airstrip where we landed, we drove through these little villages to get to the big air base, or the big army base where we were processed. We went in an army bus, you know, big old green army bus like a school bus, and it had screen grating on the windows, these heavy screens. And I thought, well, it's just to let the air circulate because they don't have air conditioning. And I wondered for sure what the screens were for. And later on I asked somebody and he said, that's so they don't throw a grenade through the window as they're passing by. And I thought, why would they want to throw a grenade at us? We're here to save them. We're here to help them. And I was baffled by that attitude. Like I said, I was very naive and very ignorant of the politics of the situation, or even the reason why we were there. I was just there to save the Vietnamese from something. I didn't really understand it, but that was what my job was. And that was the attitude I carried with me during my tour in Vietnam, is that we're here to help. And most of the guys felt that way. That we're here for a good thing. We're helping save these people from communism. And I still think that way. The first experience I had over there, when you went through your orientation, called in-country orientation, is about 3 days where they teach you a little bit about the culture, not much. Mostly they're warning you what not to do over there to get yourself in trouble. And you paid attention because it was your life was on the line, and you needed to know what you were up against, especially being in the infantry when I'd be out in combat ultimately. And so I learned as quick as I could. And the last day of the orientation, this guy comes up. He's got a little snazzy black beret on. And he said, I'm looking for volunteers, and he gave us this little speech. And he was a LRP. And I didn't know what that was at the time. It stands for Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. And they wore these special camouflage fatigues, tiger stripes, we called them. And I liked his black beret, and I thought, that is cool, I want one of those. Because it reminded me of the British Army, you know. They all wore black berets. This is long before we did. And the Israelis all wore black berets. And the professional armies around the world all wore black berets. And so did this guy. And so I volunteered. I said, I want to be one of your guys, you know, I want to join your outfit. Well, I didn't get in. They were short-handed, as always, over there, and they just put you wherever they needed you, and they just ignored your request, you know. So it took me a couple of tries before I got into the works. So first they sent me to a cavalry outfit. Now, when I was in Colorado at Fort Carson, I had learned to drive one of these APCs. We call them tracks. They're just big boxy things on a track, like a tank, except it's just like a square box. You see them all over, and the older ones, not a lot of different countries have them. But so I was assigned to the medic track. We had the track commander, we had a gunner, we had a driver, and we had a medic. And our job was to support the infantry. We'd go out sometimes in the middle of the night, pitch black, driving at breakneck speed through the countryside to the site of a big firefight that was going on with the infantry and the Viet Cong, or the NVA. And our job was to pull back the wounded and the killed from the battle, from the firefight. That's what you call a battle, when it was a firefight. And my first major firefight was a hellacious affair. It was chaotic. And the infantry was pinned down in this big rice paddy, and there was a little village, and the Viet Cong were dug in the village. And the infantry was all surrounding them, and they were attacking them, and there was planes coming in, dropping napalm on the village. It was awful. And our job was to go out and whenever somebody got killed or wounded, they'd call on the radio and have the medic track come, and we'd pull them back from the fighting area, and we'd take them away back, and then we'd call in a helicopter, a dust-off, they called them. And it was a regular helicopter that came in that was set up to take out the wounded and the dead. And we'd pick them up, and then we'd take them off and take them to the helicopter, and they'd bring in the helicopter and whisk these guys off to the field hospital. And I vividly remember there was a tank back in the paddy, and it was going backwards and forwards. And it's like, why is this guy doing this? Why is he driving? Well, the reason he was moving around is so he couldn't be hit by an RPG. He didn't want to be a target. And his tank commander had been shot right through the head, direct hit, fell inside the tank. So this 18-year-old kid was driving the tank, and all he was doing was going back and forth in the rice paddy in shock. And I had to go into the tank and pull this tank commander up by his hair. Blood all over the place, just pulled this guy out and got him off the tank and got him onto the track and took him off and sent him off in a helicopter. And there was several other guys we dusted off that afternoon. And it was a hot afternoon, and I sweat so much that I drank about 8 canteens of water in a 2-hour period of time, and it was hot, it was scary, it was chaotic, and that was my first taste of combat. After that, I had several firefights that we got into and quite a few experiences. Then I was transferred up to the Central Highlands, up to an infantry division, and I was regular infantry from there. And that meant we were humping the hills, meaning we were out in patrols all the time with a company-sized group, up and down the hills all day long, sweating, and it was awful. And I just wanted to get out of that so bad. It was so hard. You know, you had a big rucksack on your back, about 60, 70 pounds, and it was the monsoon season, you know, and it was raining and pouring all day and all night, and you try to climb up these hills and you'd be falling down and getting in the mud. And I remember while I was in the infantry at one time, we couldn't get resupplied for water because of the weather conditions. We were resupplied over there with helicopters all the time. They'd go way out in the field and bring you rations and bring water. And we couldn't get resupplied for a few days. So I remember still stringing a poncho up on the trees, between the trees. You know what a poncho is, you know, the military ponchos. And they're waterproof. And we were collecting the rain on this poncho to drink, have something to drink. And you pour it in your canteen, and it was all dirty and muddy and bugs crawling around in there. And then you drop one of these big pills in there to purify it so you could drink the stuff. And guys there would say, you know, I can't wait to get back to the world, you know. Over there, the U.S., you never said about going home or going to the U.S. You said going back to the world, because the place you were in was like another world. It was surreal, and you really didn't identify with anything going on over there. And you just wanted to go back in one piece to the world. And I remember thinking, sitting under a tree as I was drinking this goop, and I was thinking, if I ever get back to the world, I'm just going to buy a little Honda motorcycle. I'm just going to cruise down the street, and I'm never going to complain about anything again if I ever make it back alive. And that was the feeling and the attitude of a lot of guys over there. They were just hoping that they would make it back in one piece, and they would never complain about anything again, because nothing could be that bad. And that's still my feeling. In fact, when I got into politics years later, when I started a career, I've experienced quite a few ups and downs in politics, as you might imagine. You know, when you read your name in the editorial page about how stupid you are for proposing a policy, you know, it does something to you. But that stuff never bothered me. Whenever I had a little group that showed up at the courthouse one time, I remember there was a group from Marathon that showed up towards the end of my career, and they were holding little signs and it said, "Committee to terminate Mort McBain." Well, if you've ever sat there and looked at a group of people, citizens, you don't even know who they are, but their sole purpose in life is to get you fired from your job. You know, that stuff really didn't bother me, because I would always go back to my touchdown. I was always thinking, it's never as bad as it was over there. If I can survive that, I can survive it. This is just politics. This is just games. In fact, to illustrate that point, I'll tell you a little funny story about how I was hired in Marathon County. When I applied for the job in Marathon County to be a county administrator, they had, I think, 68 applications, and I made it to the top handful, which means I got to come here and have an interview for my job. Well, by then I'd been in the county government for quite a while, and I kind of knew my way around, and I figured that my interview was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I thought, well, I flew into Wausau, and I stayed overnight in a hotel, and the next day I went to the library. and I read up on all the local news to see what the county supervisors were dealing with and what kind of questions I'd be likely to get, and I was very well prepared for the interview. And I thought, well, my interview's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'll just wander over to the courthouse and I'll look around to see where the room is that I'm going to be interviewed in and kind of get comfortable. So I wandered into the room, and sure enough, just as I figured, they had gone to lunch. It was noon hour. And all the papers were all on the table, and everything was just left where it fell. And I just happened to glance at one of the papers, which was my psych evaluation. They had done a psych evaluation on all the finalists. And of course, in order to justify their fee, I'm sure, they had to say something about it, each candidate. And what they said about my candidacy was, this gentleman seems to be indecisive. Can't make up his mind. And that was a little trigger for the interview committee to ask me questions like that, you know. And I thought, indecisive, that's not true. What am I going to do? So I scurried upstairs and went into the restroom, and I thought about what I was going to say when they asked me that question. So I came down for the interview at 1 o'clock with my briefcase all properly attired, and the interview began, and we got going, and at one point in the interview, the personnel director clears his throat, which is the cue to everybody. We're going to ask him the tough one now. And he said, Mr. McBain, do you have any trouble making up your mind? Are you indecisive at all? And it was dead silence in the room. And I said, you know, when I was in Vietnam on patrol with my team, men's lives were in my hand. But I never lost a man. I never made the wrong decision. Nobody ever lost their life when they were on my team, because I was able to make instant decisions that were the right ones. And then I said, but this is politics. This is just politics. You can change your mind in politics. It's okay. And there was dead silence in the room. And I heard somebody under the breath say, shit, that was a good answer. And Linda Lawrence, who was soon to become mayor, stood up in the back and applauded with her friend Ruth Spartle. And they said, wow, that was great, because of my answers. But it was true. The experience I had in Vietnam was like a foundation for me. The other thing that helped me to do was focus my efforts on something that was important and to have self-confidence in what I was doing. As you can imagine, as an immigrant who had never gone to high school here, I really missed out on, you know, the culture experience of high school kids. I couldn't date girls when I was 18 or 19. I didn't relate to them. I'd never gone to high school. Didn't know how to drive a car, didn't know how to fix a car, didn't even know how to check the oil on a car, because I'd never been raised like that. And so I missed out on a whole enculturating experience of high school and junior high. And as horrible as those experiences can be, they are foundational. They kind of expose you to this culture. Well, I missed all of that because I went to work when I was 16 and never went back to college until I was 26. 10 years out of school. So when I interacted with people, I was very lack of self-confidence. I was very, when I spoke to people, I would get tongue-tied. I would get so embarrassed. I couldn't hold a conversation with adults without embarrassing myself and turning red in the face. I had no self-confidence, no self-esteem. I'd been raised and told by a dysfunctional mother that I was a dunderhead. I would never amount to anything. And later told that by a stepfather. And so I really believed I had no future. But when I went to Vietnam and I survived, I came home from Vietnam with much greater confidence. I realized, based on some of the experiences I had, that I was just as good as those guys from South Chicago or whatever, the other side of the tracks, which is where I thought I was from, without any education. But through experiences that I had over there, including going out on patrols with guys of all types and having them hide rather than going on patrols and avoid the dangerous stuff. I learned that I was just everybody as good as those guys. And I came back with a huge increase in my self-confidence. I also came back with something called a GI Bill, which I was told later that's your ticket to university. And I didn't even know what it was. But so Vietnam did a lot of things for me. Before I get off of that part, let me just describe for you one experience I had to give you a little flavor for boots on the ground, okay, what it's like being in combat. Because it's not like anything else you've ever experienced. Let's see, this picture right here, it describes the experience part of it that I'm going to relate to you. This is called danger commo wire. And let's just say this is me right here, I'm the team leader. And my teammate here has just discovered some commo wire on this trail. This is how it came. When I got in the LRPs finally, we went out on patrol with small teams, 3-4 men. Sometimes a big team would be 5 or 6 guys. A lot of times the 4-man teams were 2 Montagnards, which are like the Mont, 2 Montagnards and 2 GIs, 2 LRPs. And we go out for 5 or 6 days at a time. They take us out by helicopter, way the heck out there, and drop us off in some area that the brigade or the division wanted to check out. And you couldn't always see things from the air because of the jungle. So if you wanted to establish if there was any enemy in this quadrant or whatever, they'd send a LRP team out there to check it out. And you go out there with all your supplies to last for about 5 or 6 days, and then your radio and all your gear and your M16 or your grenade launcher, whatever you carried as your personal weapon. So the day before you went on your mission, you would do a little flyover of the AO, which is the area of operation, and you'd look for a landing site, for example, and you'd fly around this area and check it out, and then you'd come back the next day. You get up early in the morning, you get all your gear on, you get your team, you get your camouflage on a lot of times, and then you get on the chopper and you fly out, and you go flying out with a couple of gunships too, just in case you hit something on the way out. And so you get out to the area of where you're going to land, and the gunships do a quick fly around to see if there's any movement, if there's anybody down there. Because in the Central Highlands, if you saw anybody, if it wasn't next to a village, they were the enemy. And it was the North Vietnamese, it was the NVA, which were a lot tougher in some ways than the Viet Cong. So we fly out and we land on this little landing area, little open area. And then the first thing you do when you get on the ground is you check your comm, turn your radio on, and you call back, make sure you're in communications in case you hit something. So one of the guys carries it, and this was a 3-man team that I was on. It was my first mission as a team leader in the LRPs. My first mission as a team leader. And the guy that was with me, it was his first mission as a LRP. He'd come out of an infantry company, which is where most of the LRPs came from. They volunteered to get out of the infantry company. And so we were out, this guy was experienced. I was my first mission as a team leader, and it was his first mission as a LRP. So we were not exactly an experienced bunch, 3 of us out in the middle of nowhere. And we were walking up this hill, and our mission was to check out this big hill area. And we had our maps and our compass and stuff. No GPS back then. Most of the time we were lost and no clue where we were. But the helicopter pilots usually knew where to drop you off. So we'd start from there and we'd walk around and we'd check out the area. And we were walking up this trail. And we came to this little trail kind of up on the ridge line, just below the ridge line. And as soon as you hit a trail, you knew you were onto something. It was not an animal trail, and sometimes animals made trail over there too, but this was clearly a human trail because we could see the sandal imprints in the soft dirt. And then my teammate discovers the common wire on the ground. Now let me tell you what that means. When you see that telephone wire strung on the ground, that means you're between two enemy positions. Because when the NVA would set up like a base camp or even a temporary encampment, they would send out listening posts all over, down any trails that were around, and they'd string wire and they'd hide it under the leaves. And then he'd have a couple of guys down there at the end of the wire. And if anybody came along, they would immediately call up to the base camp or the encampment and say, hey, somebody's coming. Usually, like, GIs are coming, or Americans are coming, whatever, and they'd be ready for you. So when you see that common wire in the ground, it's like, okay, your heart's pounding already. And this is kind of scary. Your heart is pounding. You know there's somebody at the end, each end of that wire, and they're not very friendly. And their job is to kill you unless you see them first. If they see you first, you're probably dead. And we were taught, and we learned in the LURPS how to move very quietly. I can still do it today. I can walk through the forest without making much of a sound. And so we were very carefully, full alert, eyes, ears, sixth sense, everything's going. As we walked up this trail, that was our job, to find out what was up there. Still, quiet, perfectly quiet. The birds weren't even singing. And our heart's pounding, and we're just walking up. All of a sudden, and they're shooting at you. It's like, whoa, 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 what'd you do? And we jumped in a little hole, and my radio man was a little bit down the trail. And I'm saying, get up here, get up here. And he comes up and he piles into the hole with us, and they're shooting at us. And your heart is just pounding like crazy. And all your senses are just going crazy. And you say, give me the radio, and you grab the radio and you say, we're in contact, and they say, who's this, and oh, 2B team, we're in contact, we need some help, and what are you going to do? And they're shooting at you. And then you look out and you can see figures moving around in the jungle. You've just stumbled on to a little base camp. And you don't know if there's a company there or there's a whole damn regiment out there, but they're there and there's 3 of you, and they're shooting at you. And that is the scariest feeling in the world. So when you get composed a little bit, you get your act together, you're calling back to the base camp, pretty soon there's got a little spotter plane flying above you. Little single-engine Cessna, basically. And he's in contact, and you get under a different frequency, and you're talking to the pilot. And he says, where are you? You know, pop some smoke. So the enemy already knows where you are. They're shooting at you. So you pop a smoke grenade, and all this purple smoke goes up through the trees. And the pilot says, oh, okay, I got you, the spotter. And he says, you want me to bring in some support? I said, yeah, bring him in. So they call in some gunships, helicopter gunships. And they come in, and it takes them about 20 minutes to get there. And they're flying. You can hear them up there. They're flying around. And then they key in on where your smoke is, and you tell them where you want to shoot, where you want to fire. And you tell them, fire, they're all around me, you know, fire to the north of the smoke. And so the gunships come in and run, and they open up with their miniguns. And the whole jungle explodes. They're firing rockets. And then they're firing machine guns. They're firing their Gatling guns at you. And everything's just going through smoke and noise. Scary as heck. And then after the gunships go away, I got another spotter plane. And the Cessna, he leaves. He said, I'm about out of fuel. He says, I've got to go back. So he says, I'll send another spotter plane. So they send an Air Force spotter plane next. It's got 2 engines. It's got one in the front and one in the back, a little twin-engine spotter plane. It's called a FAC, Forward Air Control. So this guy's flying around up there. And he says, I got some fast movers in the area. You want me to bring them in? Fast movers are jets. They're kind of scary when you call them in because they're flying so fast, they really have a hard time putting that ordnance right where you want it. If they're off by 1 second, when they drop their ordnance, it's right on top of you. So they've got to be perfectly timed when the enemy's that close to avoid hitting you. But I said, gung-ho, you know, full of piss and vinegar, bring them in, you know. So I'm calling in jet fighters on my position just to run to blow the enemy up. And he gives me a countdown when they're coming in. They come in so fast you can't hear them coming. But you can hear them when they hit the ground, when the ordnance drops. So he gives us a countdown so we can get our head down. And we are kissing the ground. We are just boring into the ground. And he's given us a countdown as these jets circle around and then they come in on their final run. And they've got 500-pound high-drag bombs, which are huge bombs. And they're going to blow a whole big crater whenever they drop that thing. So he counts us down, and we're down there hugging the ground, just praying that we're going to be okay. All of a sudden, kaboom! You know, and the whole jungle erupts in fire and smoke, and there's trees flying everywhere. It's like, wow, and you can't see anything, but you hope it's landed on the enemy and not you. So they did a couple of runs like that. And then they expanded their 500-pound bombs, and then they've got some 40-millimeter cannons. He says, you want to come in and do a cannon run? I said, yeah, bring them in. I'm still on adrenaline rush here. So they send the jets in, and they're coming in with a 40-millimeter cannon, which is like a really big machine gun, okay? And they've got them under both wing pods. And they come in and it's like, all the trees are exploding, dust flying everywhere. And my buddy's got shrapnel splinters all over their face from the bamboo that was splintering, and dust is flying everywhere. And I said, call them off, they're too close. So they called them off and they went home. So all of a sudden it's really quiet, and the dust is settling. But the enemy's still out there, and they still know where we are. So I call for extraction. I call back and I say, you need to get us out of here. We need to bring a helicopter in and we'll somehow get out of here, because we can't stay here. They know where we are, and now they're really mad at us. So the CO that we had to come at the time was new. Okay, he was pretty new, and he's kind of gung-ho too. That's why he joined the Lurks. So he's going to come in and do an extraction. We had one rope ladder that we used, and they'd come over the treetops and they'd throw down this rope ladder, and you'd get up a few rungs and clip yourself in, and they'd haul you out of there. It's a cool way to get out of the jungle. But so the CO is flying around up there, and we pop another smoke so he can see where we're at. And he says, I'm going to come in and do an extraction. And we said, no, don't come in there. There's too many big guns. They've got 50 caliber machine guns shooting at the helicopter. We can hear them. It's like, these are big machine guns. And they could shoot down a helicopter. And our CO was saying, oh, no, I'm coming to get you. Just pop your smokes. I know where you are. And pretty soon I hear, we're going to have to do a crash dive. We're going down. They got us. And they shot the damn helicopter. And my helicopter was supposed to rescue me is doing a power glide into the next little valley. And my gunships, which were supporting him up there, they take those guys away so they can protect the helicopter that's just been shot down. So I'm all alone with my two buddies. And the helicopter with my ladder on it is over in the adjacent valley, and my gunships are over there, and I'm all alone. And the enemy is watching. They see all this stuff's going on. I thought, man, how am I going to get out of this? Eventually, they send another spotter plane out. And he says, here's your plan. He says, when I fly over your position, you get up and you run that way. Because he's identified an open LZL, a little landing zone, where we'll have to run to that, and they'll have to bring another helicopter in to land right on the ground and pick us up, because our ladder's gone. It's shot down over there. So they bring a spotter plane in, and we look up as this little plane comes over, and we look which way it's going. We gear up, and we run like hell that direction, crashing through the brush, crashing through the trees, getting out of the way, jumping over fallen trees, and the enemy's chasing us. They know what's going on, so they're shooting at us, and bullets are flying overhead, and we are running, and your heart's pounding, and you're sweating, and you can't run anymore, and finally, you make it to this little landing. And just as you get there, the helicopter sees you, and he comes right in. You jump on there, you're hanging on for dear life, and he pulls you right out of there, and it's like, wow, phew, that was close. And takes you back to the base camp. And then we had a little tradition when you got back to the base camp, is if you just came off a hot mission, they would have a cold beer waiting for you. And so, now, I'm a Mormon, so I don't drink alcohol. But when I got back after that first day, they handed me a cold beer, and boy, did I just chug it down. Best beer I've ever tasted. And that was my first day. The next day, the brigade commander says, we think there's more activity out there in that hill. We're going to send another team to the other side of the hill. Well, being young and full of vinegar and whatever, I said, well, I'll go back on the team because I know the area now. I'll go back. And so my buddy was taking his team. So I went back the next day on another mission to the other side of the hill to verify, as if they didn't know it, to verify that there was indeed a brigade-size company out there of North Vietnamese. So we went out and the next day with a new team. My two teammates were kind of recuperating from the first day, and so they went up on the base camp and just chilled out for about 3 days, getting over their experience. But I wanted to do it again. So we go out and we land on the side of a hill. There's a big crater there, and the side of the hill's all been blown off. It's been leveled with B-52 bombs, and all around this crater area is the jungle, the trees. And so we land right in the middle of this crater, surrounded by the jungle on the side of a hill. And we drop right into the bomb crater, a big crater. And so our team drops in there. And then we sit and establish communications with the base camp. So they know we're live, And the CO says, the old man says, okay, move on. I want to check this place out. So we get up and we start walking out of the bomb crater and we're walking towards the tree line. And I was on point, meaning I was in the front. And as I'm walking very carefully, I see some heads bobbing around in the underbrush. It's like, geez, there's an enemy over there. And I give him the sign, my team leader said, over there. And he says, come on back. So we go back, we drop back in the bomb crater, and we call back to the CO, and we see movement out here. There's definitely somebody around here. And the CO says, check out the other side. So we get up out of the crater, we go to the other side, and this time my buddy's in point in front. He starts walking, he gets about 20 paces out, and he sees figures moving around in the trees. Like, ooh, we're surrounded. Back in the bomb crater, we go, there's 4 of us in the bomb crater. And we're surrounded in the trees by people that move around. And they're not even hiding. It's like, can't we see them? I mean, don't they know? Well, when you land a helicopter, if you've ever been close to a helicopter when it lands, it's noisy, it's dusty, it throws up a huge plume of dust, and you can hear it for miles. We landed right in the middle of this thing, so it's like, they know we're here. And the helicopter, and it flies away, the dust settles down, and there's just 3 or 4 of us left on the ground. So they know where we are. So what are they going to do? Are they going to rush us? Are they going to wait? Well, they're going to wait for nightfall. They've got plenty of time. They know we can't get out of that bomb crater. In fact, what their enemy is hoping is that they'll send in a helicopter to try to pull us out. Sitting duck, right there. If that helicopter comes in, they're going to have all these weapons trained on it. They're going to shoot down that helicopter. And there's 4 other guys they just got, because the helicopter's a 4-man crew. So they got 4 guys on the ground praying to get out of there. And if they can bring that helicopter in, they can get 4 other guys. And then they can dispatch them at their leisure, because we're stuck. We're there. So my team leader's sweating. He's thinking, how are we going to get out of this? And we can see the heads bobbing around. Nobody's shooting at us, but they know we're there. They're plain as day. So the helicopters that dropped us, they hadn't even got back to base camp. And fortunately, they were pretty gutsy pilots, because some of the pilots would not come into a hot area like that. It's too risky. They were risking their 4-man crew. But these guys would. They said, okay, we'll come back and get you. So as the helicopters turned around, they're coming back. There's a what we call an extraction ship, and there's 2 gunships with them. That means there's 3 helicopters. 2 of them are loaded with all kinds of rockets and machine guns, and they only carry weapons. And the other ship in the middle is our extraction ship. That's a regular helicopter with a 4-man crew, and that's the one we're going to get out on. So as they're flying back to rescue us, my team leader hatches the plan that we're going to get out of there. We hope it's going to work. And here's what they come up with. They said, okay, we're going to do a couple of runs with the gunships. They'll come right in low, and they'll shoot rockets all around. These are pretty big rockets. and plus we'll shoot the place out with our cannons. And then on the third run, the extraction ship is going to be right in between those two gunships. And he's just not even going to touch the ground. He's just barely going to come in right in between these two gunships who are still firing away, keeping the enemy's heads down. And your job, of course, is to get on the helicopter and get out of there as quick as you can. And as you're pulling out, the other gunship comes in behind you to cover you and shooting up the place, and we're all fine. So that's what happened. And it was perfect. It was like a clockwork extraction. The only problem, of course, is the enemy didn't know what their part in the plan was. They thought they were to shoot us down. So we come in, they start circling, they come right in with the first couple of gunships, and they're shooting rockets, and all hell's breaking loose. And you can see all the brush and stuff in the trees being impacted as these guys come in firing rockets. They did that 2 times. And then the third run, the first gunship comes in really slow, and he's shooting all the place up. So these guys are hunkered down because these rockets can do a lot of damage. And as he comes in, just as he arrives at the crater, the chase ship comes in behind him. And he doesn't even touch the ground. We grabbed onto that thing, and they're pulling it on, you know. And he lifts up, which is a very vulnerable time for the helicopter. He lifts up and gets a little bit altitude, and he's right over the enemy. But the second gunship comes in right behind him, and they're letting everything go with the rockets, and we're turning around with M16s. The door gunners are firing. Everybody's firing all at the same time as that helicopter slowly lifts up and then picks up a little speed and does a turn and gets back down through the valley, and we got out of there. It was like something out of John Wayne. It was so cool. That was the best extraction I ever had. So that's just one of my experiences that gives you a little feel for the way you feel in combat. The only thing I've ever found that comes close to the feelings that you have when you're in combat is if you can imagine a police officer in the dead of night walking down a dark alley in search of a suspect who may be armed and dangerous. And as that cop walks down the alley, all his senses are on full alert. You know, he's listening and looking for any little thing. He's looking for a dangerous guy that might just be there to shoot him and kill him. That's the only experience I can imagine that's anywhere close to the way you feel when you're in combat with people shooting at you. It's scary as heck. You never quite get used to it, but you get better at it as you go along. It's not quite as chaotic when you realize what's going on, and you can actually inflict pain on the enemy as well as he can inflict on you. So that's the combat situation. Somebody once explained that combat is long periods of boredom interspersed by sheer moments of terror. And that's pretty good. Sheer moments of terror. The rest of the stuff is boring when you're in base camp. It's like nothing. But once those bullets start flying, it's just terror, sheer terror. And you do kind of get better at it as you go along. But you never get completely used to it or unafraid. So that's combat. Now let me just take a couple of minutes to talk about the politics of war. This is from my perspective as a very uneducated, naive, non-citizen, draftee, which is kind of the lowest of the low in terms of understanding of what's going on. My attitude, because I was LDS at the time, my attitude was that we should support our country because they must know what they're doing, surely. I mean, the president has got to know why we're in Vietnam. I don't need to know. I'm just an infantryman, you know. But so my attitude was fairly supportive. I did not agree with a lot of the war protesters that were going on at the time. I didn't see myself as a draft dodger. I saw myself as a patriot and a would-be citizen, you know, and very supportive. And that's still the way I feel. Now, how do I feel about the Vietnam War itself? Well, in retrospect and in hindsight, like many of you, I suspect, looking at how that war was waged and why it was waged, it seems to me that that was a huge waste of capital. Human capital, monetary capital. We lost 56,000 young men and a few young women over there. 56,000. And what happened when it was all over? We left. The North Vietnamese came down, took over the country. They're still a communist nation. Now we have veterans going over there to build schools and hospitals for them and try to help them out. But what did we accomplish in that war? Not very much. Which to me is a huge lesson in why this United States should really never engage itself in foreign interventions, especially when they don't understand the culture and the politics of that nation. I think the same thing is happening to some extent in Iraq. Now the first Gulf War I think was a little different. The first Gulf War was the goals and objectives of the first Gulf War were very clear. It was when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait, which was a big supplier of oil. And our sole objective in Kuwait was to get the Iraqis out. And we had a lot of allies in the process, including many of the Arab neighbors of Saddam Hussein, who wanted him out of Kuwait because they were next, maybe. And so that war was very short and very effective. And it worked. Iraq, this time around, is a much different story. What have we accomplished over there so far? They're still blowing up the marketplaces. They're still engaged in horrible sectarian conflict. They're going back to the way we were before we even intervened, except Saddam Hussein had a lot more control because he was a brutal dictator. But as soon as he was gone, all these little sectarian conflicts came right back to the surface. And we're over there in the middle of this thing trying to fix it. I love Colin Powell's words when he said, talking about foreign interventions, if you break it, you buy it. Or maybe he said, if you break it, you fix it. But it's so true. So we went over to Vietnam, we broke it. And then we couldn't fix it. We went to Iraq the second time, and we broke it. We broke the system. We took their system apart. And then we didn't have the understanding to fix it. But we sure paid for it. And I think Afghanistan would probably go the same way. We went over there, we jumped right in, we broke the system, we tried to give them a new system. We're buying it, but I'm not sure we fixed it. And I think after we leave Afghanistan, the same thing will happen as happened in Iraq. Those old sectarian conflicts will come right back to the surface.
Karzai has wanted us gone for a long time.
Yeah, he knows what's coming. And he's one of the smarter ones over there, probably. He knows that he has to set some peace standards with the Taliban, or they will take over, like they did before we went in there and chased them out. So that's my naive, a little more educated view of war and conflict. And I'll stop there and ask if there are questions about anything. Yeah?
Did you volunteer again on the third day for alerts?
No, we didn't need it. By then, the brigade commander had finally figured out, yeah, there's a whole bunch of NVA out there, and they probably did an arc light on it, which is a B-52 strike. So they go in and establish that there was a lot of enemy, and then you call the B-52s, and then they just bomb the whole place.
You talked about the naivete going away and that you got more experience, but besides giving up the naivete, what else do you think you gave up as a trade-off for your survival skills that kept you going?
I don't feel like I gave up much.
Okay.
I got more out of it than I probably put into it. Not only in terms of the GI Bill, which was a lifetime investment for me, but the self-confidence and the feelings that I had when I came home, and feeling that I'm now finally part of the American dream, if you like. Because, hey, I'm a veteran, right? And everybody loves veterans, right? You can't say anything bad about a veteran. And if anybody does, hey, I'm a veteran. I fought in Vietnam. It's like, whoa, he's a veteran. So that's good enough for me. That's plenty. The GI was a wonderful bonus to get a free college education, which then caused me to reflect, on my better educated approach to war and conflict and things like that.
Can you describe the picture with the tiger and the situation?
Yeah, all of these pictures, by the way, are things that I experienced over there. When you were in Vietnam, they warned you, there's tigers over here, there's poisonous snakes, all kinds of nasty creatures that will do you in if they get a chance. But when you're in the infantry company, crashing through the brush, and there's 150 of you, and you're setting out point guards, and you never see any of these tigers or snakes, and they're all getting out of the way from the infantry company, crashing through the brush in the jungle. But when you're out there with a 4-man team, very quietly walking through the jungle, and your objective is not to be seen or heard, just in case there's enemy out there. When you're in that situation, you're much more likely to come in contact with wildlife. And that's exactly what happened. We were out on a patrol one day. There was 4 of us, 2 Montagnards, like 2 Hmong guys, and two lurks. And we'd been out there for like 4 days. And our job was to do a trail watch. We sat up overlooking this little trail. And our job was just to sit there every day and watch anything that came down that trail and report to brigade what was going down the trail. And we were in a bamboo thicket. Now this bamboo thicket was all dried up, and it was surrounded by dried bamboo. If you've ever walked on dried bamboo, it's very noisy. So we sat up in the middle of that thicket so we could hear anybody that got close. We would hear them crunching that bamboo, and that would be our early warning system. Well, it was the 4th day, and it was an afternoon. It was hot and muggy. We were just chilling out, just kind of laying back. And all of a sudden, my 6th sense kicked in. When you spend a lot of time in the jungle, you develop a 6th sense. It's surprising, especially at night when you can't see anything. I mean, in the jungle over there at night, it's pitch black. You cannot see your hand. You can't see anything. So you begin to rely on your 6th sense and on your sense of hearing. Well, this was the afternoon, and I was experienced alert by then, and I had kind of developed a sort of a 6th sense if anybody was around. We were just chilling back in the middle of our little bamboo thicket, and all of a sudden I got this feeling like there's somebody watching. And I knew what that feeling was. It means there's danger. So I just raised up slowly and I peered out through the bamboo. And there was a big tiger walking up towards us, and it hadn't seen us. And it got about, probably from here to the back of the room. It picked up its head, and it saw me. And it just let out this kind of a gurgle, like, it's like, geez, there's no bars between us. How do you take care of a tiger that's staring you in the face? And I elbowed my little Montagnard, and I said, this is a sign for a tiger, by the way. The tiger's over there. And the tiger was just standing there growling at me. And the other guy was just making his lunch, he hadn't even noticed. And I'm thinking, I shoot it, what do I do? If we shot that tiger, that sound would have reverberated throughout the valley. And any NBA or Viet Cong man would have known that there were some GIs over in that area, because they would have recognized the sound of an M16, which is a lot different than the sound of an AK-47. You always listen for the gunfire so you could tell if it was an American weapon like an M16 or an AK-47, which the communists carried. So anyway, I didn't want to shoot it because it would give our position away. But I was scared of the thing. I mean, we had to spend one more night there. So I decided to sort of chase it away. So I jumped out with my rifle was at the bottom of my feet, which wasn't very smart. But I jumped down, I grabbed my rifle, and I brought it up like this. And that tiger just turned tail and bounded away with its tail whipping. And it never made a sound. Not a sound. So me and one of the Montagnards went up and we looked at its trail. It was these huge paw prints on the trail that we could see where it walked up. And the scariest thing was we had to spend one more night there. And the tiger knew we were there. So all that afternoon we set up all these extra trip flares. We had empty sea ration cans, everything we could set up around the perimeter. And we didn't have a very restful night, I can tell you that. Because when it got pitch black, We were laying there on the ground, and it's pitch black. You can't see a thing, and you're listening for sounds. But that tiger is able to walk up without making a sound, which was really scary. Now, there were stories over there of tigers that came up on patrols or the listening posts at night and would actually drag people off. There were some legitimate stories. One of my favorite ones was on the fire bases over there, which was a big hill that you'd clear off, and all the infantry would set up camp, okay, on top of this big hill. Then every night they'd send down listening posts to the bottom of the hill on the trails that they used. And those 3 LPs would stay down there all night, pitch blackness, all surrounded by trip flares, you know, and claymore mines. In case the enemy was coming up to attack the fire base, they'd hit the LPs first. And kind of like a booby trap thing, so the fire base would know that there was an enemy coming up if they got past the LPs. Well, you're supposed to have one guy staying awake at all times. So you'd have shifts, you know, so the first 2 would sleep for 2 hours, then they'd wake the third guy up, and then the next guy would stay awake. Well, one of these LPs, there was 3 of them, and all 3 of them fell asleep. The guy that was supposed to be awake fell asleep. And not only that, but he's snoring. Okay, so these 3 guys are down at the bottom of the hill, and a tiger comes up, and a tiger smelled them. It could smell where they were. And the tiger got a hold of this guy's leg, starts dragging him backwards. This guy wakes up, pitch blackness, and something's got his mouth around his leg and dragging him backwards. Unfortunately for him, the tiger backed into a trip flare, which is a little wire, and it has a flare on the end, and if you hit that wire, bright flare, lights up the whole place. Spooked the tiger, and the tiger ran away. This guy wakes up, and he's shaking, and he's got big teeth marks. And the SS buddies are hitting him around the head and say, "You damn fool, you know, you're supposed to stay awake." And he says, and he almost got, and there was counts of guys who were killed by tigers. Only in the small teams, though. The infantry would go crashing through there, they'd never see them. But you were in a small, quiet, stealthy team. You would occasionally run into tigers, and occasionally they would stalk you. The other thing I learned about tigers later, doing a little research, tigers always attack you from behind. They're very good hunters. Their feet are covered with hair. So when a tiger stalks somebody, it can walk through broken glass, anything, you will not hear a sound because it has these big hairy pads on its feet. And you never see it coming. It attacks you from behind. So in some of those countries over there, like Borneo, where they send woodcutters into the woods, those guys have a technique. They wear a little face, a little mask on the back of their head as they're walking down the trail. The tiger comes up and tries to stalk them, and what it sees is somebody's face walking backwards, and it won't attack, maybe, if you're lucky, if it knows the rules. You learn all that stuff after you come back and after a few close calls. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
What was your homecoming experience?
My homecoming experience was very uneventful, and I've heard all the stories, you know, the baby killers and all that stuff. When I came home, I took off, went up to Canada to my sister's and spent a couple months up there, just kind of decompressing. I hitchhiked up to Newfoundland, and I stayed there for 2 months, and that was my way of dealing with the stress, you know, and coming back to the world. Let me talk just a little bit about that, because I kind of identify with some of the guys that are coming back now from Afghanistan and Iraq. In World War II and Korea, when the guys came home from combat, they came on a ship, and it was maybe a 10-day journey at least, maybe 2 weeks to get home, between the process and then in the ship, and then the process and on the other side. And so you had at least 2 weeks to sort of get yourself back in the attitude that you're back home in the world, okay? And you can adjust your thinking. The problem now when we have veterans come home is that they, sometimes within 48 hours, they're back in the States. 48 hours from when they were walking in the streets of Iraq with a weapon, with a loaded weapon, watching for any snipers or anybody that would be trying to shoot them. When I came home from Vietnam, I flew home, so I didn't have much of a, decompression period. And that's the problem with some of our veterans coming home today. They're not given enough time to condition themselves to the fact that they're home, nobody's shooting at them, nobody's trying to booby trap them. When you don't get that adjustment period, it sometimes can lead to problems. I know of veterans who have come home from Vietnam and who didn't have a lot of adjustment time. One day this guy would be carrying an M16 or an M60 even, and 3 days later he'd be driving his hometown in the streets. And he gets pulled over by a highway patroller or something because he's going too fast or his license is expired. And from the point of view of a veteran, when that happens to you, when you're pulled over by somebody who has a firearm and you don't, a veteran looks at that differently than you would. You're still in survival mode and you're thinking, wait a minute, this guy's got his weapon with him and I have nothing. Where's my M16? And you think like that. And it does something to your head. And if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, it can exacerbate the situation very quickly. And suddenly you're in conflict with a police officer or somebody in a bar that takes a swing at you. And your survival instincts kick in and you go ballistic. And you might hurt the guy. And then your defense in court is, well, I had PAD. That is true. That is a defense, in my opinion, for a lot of these incidents that happen with recently returned veterans who have not had a proper recalibration of their life. They're still on combat mode. I remember when I came home, I went to a picnic. This was months after I'd come home. I was at a picnic. And as I went to the picnic, I noticed that the people were all really close together. Well, that's a no-no. One grenade would get all of them. So I didn't sit with them. Now, I had two things going on in my head. One side was saying, these guys are way too close together. One grenade would get the whole lot of them, so I'm going to sit over here with my back to a tree. The other side of my head was saying, wait a minute, you're back home. That's not logical. I know, but I'm still going to sit over here because my instincts are so strong that I can recognize what's going on, but I'm still not going to sit over there with that group where one grenade is going to get the whole lot of them. That's the mentality that you have when you come home from combat. And it takes a while to decompress, to recondition yourself. And if something bad happens in the interim, you can get into a very bad situation very quickly in a bar or being pulled over or somebody with a gun or with a weapon that challenges you or that threatens you in any way. And your instincts will come out really quickly, especially if you're a Marine or infantryman or whatever. Because for the last year, you've been conditioned to respond, to react quickly to any threat, perceived or real or otherwise. So I'll just stop there. Yes?
Relative to all the paintings, which are miraculous, to say the least, when was that done, and was that also part of the experience?
No. The PC answer would be, yes, this is how I reconditioned myself through art therapy. That's baloney. A few years ago, I just decided I wanted to start painting again. And I thought, what am I going to paint? I know, I could paint something and maybe there'd be a market for all my Vietnam buddies. I'd sell them prints. So I started painting some of my Vietnam experience. I haven't sold much, but I'm still having fun with it. But there's no real, cool answer like, oh yeah, this is therapy.
This is 20 years after the fact.
Really not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mort, do you have prints of those available?
Yeah, I do actually. So I'll talk to you later about it.
In the trunk of your car?
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Did you do more than one tour?
No, just one.
And what years were you in again?
1968. From the whole of 1968, I was over there. We had guys that did a lot of tours. Some people would say, yeah, those were the crazy guys, but we had guys that really enjoyed this stuff, especially in the LRPs and Special Forces. That's where you'll find guys doing multiple tours, because they really liked the combat and the independent situations that they found themselves. When you were in an infantry company, you just stumbled along following orders, you know, charge this hill, do this, set up your camp here, you know, dig a foxhole here. When you were in the LRPs or Special Forces or Marine Recon, there was only like 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 of you. And so you were really in charge of everything. And you were way out there by yourself with just your buddies. And that was a much better situation for some of us than being in just in the infantry company. That's why most of the LRPs came out of the infantry companies to join this more elite unit. You know, if you like that sort of thing, that's great. And some guys were really good at it. I had guys who served 3 or 4 tours over there. They just really liked this stuff. And they had the hardest time adjusting when they came home. Because their whole life became this combat, high adrenaline sort of existence. Very hard to readjust when you come back home to a normal life, you know. And some of them never did. And those are the guys that are living under bridges right now that just couldn't quite adjust. Yeah.
That wire that connected those 2 groups together, did you cut that wire then?
Oh, no. We just followed it up to see what was at the other end.
Oh, you didn't cut it so they couldn't communicate?
No, we didn't think about cutting it.
Oh, well, I would have thought that for that first.
What would have happened if we'd have cut it? They would have noticed there was something wrong.
Well, they already.
And they would have sent somebody down their trail and check on why.
Oh, okay.
So they would have come right down the trail. We just preferred to blunder into them anyway. They just happened to see us before we saw them.
With your coming back from Vietnam in the infantry and that, and now we have these young gentlemen coming from Vietnam, we have them coming from Iraq, we got them coming from Afghanistan. Can you touch on why you may think that the suicide rate is as high as what it is? I know like when World War II was in Korea, we didn't have the media there that we have today, but I mean,
Well, I don't have a really good answer, but I think it is related to the stress of being in combat and under very difficult situations. World War II was different, as was Korea, in the sense that the enemy was clearly identified. You knew exactly why you were there, who you were fighting, and what the preferred outcome was, which was to retain that country for democracy of some kind and block the communist takeover. But in Vietnam, I think, was the first war where it had mostly elements of a civil war. There were 2 enemies in Vietnam, 2 types of enemy. You had the North Vietnamese, a separate country, who were determined to unite with the South. Then in the South, you had the South Vietnamese under a corrupt political regime and continued corruption, no matter who was in charge. But within that culture of South Vietnam, you had a civil war going on as well. You had the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were the South Vietnamese enemy that we faced. And they were local people from the villages of South Vietnam. So when you went into a village in South Vietnam, if you suspected there were Viet Cong, you didn't know who the enemy was. In fact, stories abound around an infantry fire base. Like, we would have a Vietnamese come in, you know, and perform services for the GIs. You know, they sometimes would sell you things, sometimes it would be your barber. And it was possible, and it actually happened in some cases, where in the daytime you'd have a South Vietnamese guy come on base and he'd cut your hair. He was your barber. Or maybe it was a housekeeper who would come on and tidy up your tent, because GIs were, you know, not very tidy. So these ladies would come in, they'd do your laundry, and they'd clean up your place, and they'd cut your hair. At night, you'd go on an ambush, and you'd kill your barber. He was really a Viet Cong. And at night, he'd put on his black PJs, and he'd go out on an ambush to try to kill Americans. Or he'd target part of the base camps with mortars. In the daytime, they'd walk around, and you think nothing of it, but they were pacing off the distance in those base camps to the ammo dump, for example, or to the officer's mess, or to the command center on the base camp. And at night, they'd go back and they'd target sector these specific places in the base camp, and then they'd lob mortars at you, try to hit the ammo dump. Or they'd ambush you because they'd know when the patrols were coming out, and they'd wait outside and they'd try to ambush the GIs coming out. And if you got into a firefight, you might kill your own barber or your housekeeper in the daytime. So we were in the midst of really a civil war in Vietnam. That's why it was unsuccessful. You cannot prevail in a civil war. Because first of all, you don't understand the culture or even the politics of that country when you thrust yourself in to help them, fix them up. If you don't have a real good understanding of what you're doing, you should not be in there. And that's why we messed up Vietnam so bad. We tried many different programs, to relate to the people, but we really can't relate to the people of Vietnam. They're just a whole different. How many of you feel comfortable relating to the Hmong who are here? I mean, do you feel comfortable that you really understand how they feel and how they would respond? We're friendly with them. We love them. We want to help them all we can. We're polite and we're politically correct and we're respectful, but we really don't understand them in the sense that we know how they feel about things. Mostly we don't have a clue how they react based on their background and their culture. So it's very difficult when you insert yourself into a country in a foreign intervention. In most cases, I would say, you're going to be unsuccessful. And you may be able to control that environment for a while with enough manpower, money, and troops. But when you leave, chances are that place will revert back to what it was before you got there. It's exactly what happened in Vietnam. It reverted back to a corrupt political culture. Except this time it was communist-led. Same thing is going to happen, it's already happening in Iraq. They've reverted back to a politically corrupt, sectarianly violent culture. Same reason why we can't find peace in the Middle East. It would be like us sending troops over to Israel to straighten them out. What would that accomplish? Well, we'd maybe get under control for a while, but as soon as we left, it'd go right back to what they've been doing for 2,000 years. That's the danger of foreign interventions. And I hold our elected leaders accountable. Now, I still support the system because I really don't feel I have any more information than they do. So I support interventions for the most part, unless they're blatantly stupid. But I fear for the outcomes when we get involved in foreign interventions by naive, inept, inexperienced politicians that we have running our system. They don't know enough, I believe, to prevail in a foreign environment. That's just my opinion, okay?
Were the mountain guards able to come to the U.S. and
No.
send-
Very few of them ever came over. I've never met any of them over here. But that's why I feel close to the Hmong. The Hmong performed that same function in Laos as the Montagnards did in South Vietnam. And so I just kind of naturally gravitated to supporting the Hmong here. In fact, I helped start the first Hmong veterans group here. They didn't even have a veterans chapter, even though they're all veterans. But they've never been recognized by the federal government, which I think is a travesty. They're veterans just as much as the Filipinos were in the Second World War. But our federal government says, they're not really veterans. Well, hell, they were working for the CIA. They were paid by the CIA. They lost their country defending ours against communism. What more do they have to prove? And every Hmong family that I know has lost many, many relatives in their family. Every one of them. They understand war. They don't understand why we don't provide more support for them. as legitimate veterans, and I think that's a terrible thing. John?
Will we ever have a memorial
Yes.
to the Hmong?
Yes, I got some great news. Just keep your eyes open. We are currently designing a memorial to the Hmong soldiers that's going to be in the courthouse. And in fact, here's what the monument's going to look like. It's going to be 3 individuals. It's going to be an American pilot supported by 2 Hmong soldiers, and they've just rescued him from having bailed out of his fighter plane over Laos. And it's gonna be a life-size statue with these 3 individuals. In fact, I'll tell you something funny. When you see that memorial, which should be maybe in 18 months, it'll be ready. It'll be unveiled at the courthouse. If you look at the face of the pilot, if you see a strange resemblance to Mort McBain, it's just a coincidence.
Who designed
They
it?
can be indoors or outdoors?
It's going to be outdoors. It's going to look kind of like, the 3 soldiers memorial, Vietnam Memorial in Washington. They did the wall, and then everybody said, it's not a real memorial, so they did 3 statues of the soldiers, helping each other. That's going to be kind of what it's like. Except it's going to be 2 Hmong and the American pilot whom they rescued over in Laos. And that's on the drawing boards right now. It's being designed. And then in the next month or 2, they'll probably start fundraising for it. And it's going to be full size, and right on the courthouse lawn. And that will tell the story on the base. It'll tell the story of the Hmong, so that hopefully the rest of the folks around here will finally understand why the Hmong are here, Yes. There's a question over here. Yes.
In your time in politics and what you were saying, and I don't want to get into politics, but our leaders that we have, Senate, Congress, President, whatever, would it be better, do you think, we wouldn't get into these kind of wars if they had service-related time themselves? I always felt that they should all have to have, that should be mandatory almost, but we can't have that.
That's a good point. The experience of service provides an element in your life that you cannot get in any other way, I think. Kennedy, devised the Peace Corps to help deal with that issue. If you didn't want to serve in the military, then you could serve in the Peace Corps. But I think that general principle is correct. It gives you a different perspective and a valuable perspective to actually be involved in a serious war. And it definitely gives you a lot of compassion and feelings for those who are involved. So I think there's value, but I don't know how you would achieve that.
Have you ever been back to Vietnam? And if
No,
do you
never,
have a desire to
never
do
had
so?
any really desire. But I encourage people to go over there, veterans that I know, and they say, hey, I'm going to Vietnam. I say, good luck. Give them a little money, help build a school or something. It's great. I'm just so busy here that I just let them do it. Not because I have anything against that. I think it's a great cause that we are over there from the civilian aspect helping the Vietnamese. Because we did a lot of damage to that country. I mean, we destroyed that country. And they're still recovering. We broke that country really good. And then the communists come in and finish the job.
What area was most of your combat duty in?
I served in the south part for the 1st Infantry Division around Saigon, the outlying areas of Saigon. And then the rest of the time was in the Central Highlands. Dak To, Pleiku, Vung Tau, all those places up in the central jungle area in the Highlands. Beautiful country, by the way.
I've heard it said that we lost the war, but we won peace. In other words, that they have a good feeling toward Americans now. Is that true or not?
Well, the current generation, I'm just guessing here because I really don't know from personal experience, but the current generation, the younger people over there, and even the middle-aged generation, they have no memory of the war. It's the people mostly our age and older that remember, but this current generation doesn't really have a lot So I know we're welcomed over there when we go over there to do projects for them. They appreciate that. Yeah. Oh yeah, they're happy to have us do things like that, and they need a lot of it because they are a third world country ruled by a rigid communist regime, just like Laos. So they're hurting in a lot of ways, but they're still accepting of American help, which I think is good. Okay.
I think with that, we will.